Yes.
Uhuru. Uhuru and welcome to all our viewers. This is an Uhuru Solidarity Movement web show entitled Shut Down Colonial Prisons, Reparations Now. My name is Jamie Simpson. I'm a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and your co-host tonight. And it's an honor to be here. I want to announce that this is a fundraiser for the Black Power Blueprint, putting self-determination into the hands of the African working class. And we have a goal of raising at least $200 tonight, and you can help contribute to that goal of supporting self-determination for African people. Make this a stance of reparations by going to blackpowerblueprint.org and donating generously. And I'm honored to introduce my co-host, Jesse Neville, who's going to introduce our esteemed guest for the evening.
Uhuru, Jamie, good to be here, and I would like to appreciate you for hosting this show and appreciate the great honor of introducing our esteemed guest, starting with, directly to my right, Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, Akilé Anai is here with us. Thank you so much for being with us on this web show. Really excited to speak with you and really appreciate having you on with us tonight. Uhuru. So, and I also want to appreciate joining us from St. Louis, Missouri, Chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, Penny Hess. Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny.
Uhuru. Great to be here.
Thank you. And I want to salute Director Akilé and Chairwoman Penny, and I want to salute Chairman Amalia Shatella, our leadership, the founder and leader of the Uhuru Movement, the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, under whose leadership we have the incredible honor of working and building the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, taking the strategy and the struggle for African revolution into the white community in the form of building a movement for reparations to African people. Reparations which go towards concrete economic development programs of the African working class, led by Deputy Chair Onazine Yeshatela, who I also want to give a revolutionary salute to, Uhuru, to the chairman and deputy chair, the incredible African revolutionary leaders whose influence and leadership is felt and resonates throughout the entire globe.
Uhuru. Thank you for that overview, Jesse, and really want to unite with saluting Chairman Amalia Shatella, Deputy Chair Onazine Yeshatela, and the Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party. And we're so honored to have on the air with us not only Director Akilé Anai of the African People's Socialist Party, but also Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People's Solidarity Committee. Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny Hess.
Uhuru. Uhuru. Just really excited to be here tonight. I want to salute Director Akilé. It's an honor to be on the same program as Director Akilé. And I also want to salute you, Jamie, and USM Chair Jesse. Excuse me one second. Excuse me. It's going to be 3 degrees tomorrow, so I'm trying to brace myself here. Of course, I want to join in saluting Chairman Amalia Shatella, the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, but also our leadership in the African People's Solidarity Committee. And I want to salute also Director Akilé, which I already said, and Deputy Chair Onazine Shatella, and all the National Central Committee and members of the African People's Socialist Party. African People's Solidarity Committee is the organization of white people under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. We work in the white communities to organize genuine solidarity with the right of African people to the total liberation of Africa, and African people everywhere, and for reparations to African people. So I know we're talking about shut down the US colonial prison system today, and it's also part of a big campaign that we're taking on in the Uhuru Solidarity Movement to expose this colonial prison system and the depth of it. And we are going to be targeting the CEO, among other things, the CEO of the GEO private prison group or corporation, and his name is George Zoley. That is one of the people we're going to be targeting to pay reparations to the Black Power blueprint for just, stealing the lives of millions and millions of African people and making millions of dollars personally and in their corporation based on the suffering of the African population in the colonial prison system. And we don't just see shutting down private prisons as the answer, because the colonial prison system is still there, and that's what this is part of. But we just see it as a way to show how the prison industry has reaped untold billions, if not trillions, of dollars to the US economy and to white people. So I just wanted to say, first of all, that the US prison population, the number of people in prison in the United States, is the largest prison population in the entire world. And there are 2.3 million people in prison, and it's 25% of the entire world's prisoners. So the US has 330 million people in population. China has over a billion, getting close to 1.5 billion people. And yet the US prison population is 5 times higher than any other country. In terms of, in the US, for example, has 716 people per every 100,000 people in prison. But in individual states like Louisiana, for example, there are 1,300 people in prison per every 100,000. And, the US is always talking about China and all of the human rights violations, but with over 1 billion people in population, China has 118 people per 100,000, and their total number of people in prison is 1,650,000. So the US has 7 times the prison rate of China, and even almost double, actually double the actual number of people that China has in prison. So, you can just see the depth of what this prison industry is in the United States. I just want to say a few more statistics. At the end of 2017, federal and state prisons in the United States held about 475,900 inmates, according to what they're releasing, who were African. And they're saying, well, there's less now than there were before, but it is nevertheless at least 50% of this prison population is African. And I have read that the reason that it's less, that it comes out that it's gone down from 50% to maybe 45%, is because that they added the category, quote, mixed race. And therefore that is taken out of African. And, they have all these ways of hiding the number of prisons. But anybody who's ever visited a prison, been, to a prison, been in a courtroom, anywhere in this country, it's all African. It's all African. It's just so blatantly, shockingly true, except for areas where it's going to be all Mexican or all indigenous, or as in Hawaii, it's all indigenous people to Hawaii. So in the United States, there's also 60,000 children in prison. And, well, let me just say this, 60,000 children in juvenile prisons and 200,000 children in adult prisons. And there's even up to 2,500 children serving life sentences without possibility of parole. I mean, there's almost no country in the world that does that. That is a violation of the United Nations Human Rights Covenant, and very few countries even ever put children in prison. The United States is one, and of course, the majority of children in prison are African, and these prisons for children are incredibly brutal. With the children don't get enough to eat, they're starving, they're sexually abused, they're literally physically abused. And in many cases, I know in Miami and at a quote youth camp in northern Florida, the party had taken up different cases where African young people were killed, were murdered in prison. So, African people in prison are in prison 5 times more than white people in the US. 11 million people go in and out of US prisons and jails every year. So while they say there's 2.3 million people in prison, that's on any given day. But of all the people who go through the door or come in the door, that's 11 million people inside the United States every single year. There's also over 4 million people on parole or probation at any given time. So you're talking about millions and millions of people, upwards of 15 or more million people. And if you say half of those are African, you're talking about over 7 million African people tied to the prison system every single day in this country, or over a year. And that's why, there's these statistics like there's 1.5 million African men missing from African communities because of the rate of this mass incarceration, and how this level of imprisonment, or this reality of colonialism, is genocide. It's absolutely genocide. It falls under the Genocide Convention to remove people from the group. And under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, we learn that the conditions facing African people inside this country are colonialism. And, and I want to say that, and like the chairman says, colonialism is horrible. It is, he uses stronger words like that, and I'm not going to say it, but, it's brutal, it's vicious. And that, all these statistics that I've just said, to us as the white community, who are the colonizer nation, who sit on the pedestal of the oppression of African people, these are numbers. But for African people, the suffering and the impact of the things that I just said, well, we really can't calculate that. We can't even express the depth of that. When you see people, as there are in the party even, who have been in prison for 30 years, people who have been in prison as children, and how that affects and reverberates out into the entire community, not only to their families, their children, their loved ones, their parents, but also, as it's saying, that it skews the what should be practically a 50-50 ratio of African women and men. It skews that, and it just reverberates out into the entire population. It's also people that can't work, that can't contribute to the society, that can't be part of a movement for the freedom and liberation of African people. So, the African People's Solidarity Committee was formed because the African People's Socialist Party and the chairman, Omali Yeshitela, had developed the science to analyze that this entire system of capitalism, and the United States itself was born of the assault on Africa, on the the turning of African people into commodities for sale, into machines, in forced labor for hundreds of years, for about 600 years, and that this created the wealth that capitalism enjoys and experiences today. It completely traces back to that. And in addition to the assault on Africa and also the theft of Africa's resources, the genocide of the indigenous people, the theft of this land, and the colonial domination of the people on the planet Earth, and that all white people are part of the colonizer nation. And so, that it makes it really clear when we hear Chairman Omali Yeshitela lay out the science, lay out this political understanding called African internationalism, that it is not a question of racism. These statistics that I just showed you, it's not because of racism, it's because of colonialism. And the definition of colonialism is literally an occupation by one state power or country or people, and complete control over another country or people, occupying it with settlers and exploiting it economically for the benefit of the entire colonizing nation. And it means that everybody, all the colonizers benefit, rich, poor, everything. All of us sit on this pedestal, and the prison system is a perfect example of how that works. So, imprisonment in the United States has increased 500% since 1970. And the reason for that, there was massive building of prison, just a frenzy in the 1970s and 80s. I was out in California when the party was there in the 1980s under the leadership of the Uhuru movement and the Oakland years, as it's called, when the party was struggling around every issue: housing, healthcare, prison, police, all of that. And during that time, California was just madly building prisons everywhere, all over the state. And at that time had the highest prison population inside the US, and which is pretty close to the top still today, maybe second to Texas. They were always in competition with each other. But the reason that frenzy happened, it happened with the counterinsurgency against the African Revolution of the 1960s. And that revolution was, crushed by US government programs like COINTELPRO, or the CIA program called Operation Chaos, all the different attacks, the assassinations, as we know, of Malcolm X and Bobby Hutton and Fred Hampton and Martin Luther King, and the destruction of the movement, and not just the movement, but the ideas of it, the just the revolutionary stance, the organizations of the revolution, and everything. And that a key part of that counterinsurgency was to bring drugs in, deadly drugs like heroin, from Southeast Asia when the US was waging a counterinsurgency war against the people of Vietnam, and to basically just impose them in African communities all over the country, to criminalize the African community, and to make sure, as the chairman said, to salt the earth, to make sure that African people would never rise up again. And that it also later began to impose crack cocaine, specifically geared, a derivative of cocaine that was specifically engineered to crush the African community. And reading about the CIA's Operation Chaos, they had a purpose for every drug that they did, and crack cocaine was very clearly there because it crushes, it stamps out in a person's brain the ability to ever be happy, to ever want to fight and struggle. And that's what they tried to do. They tried to crush the African community's will to struggle with the drugs, and then criminalizing the entire African population, as we can see, in the news here every single day. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch just spews out the slander against the African community. That's like a whole section of the newspaper is like how criminal this community is. And this is all part of the counterinsurgency and massive imprisonment and, all kinds of the Rockefeller laws, they said back then, the mandatory minimums that they began to establish, the fact that crack cocaine had 500 times greater sentencing mandates than powder cocaine, which is basically in the white community. All of these things were imposed on the African community, and prisons were a key part of it. And, but it was more than just that. There was another effect that was colonialism, and that was this counterinsurgency was essentially economic stimulus for the white community all over the country from every class. Because during this time, in the late 70s and early 80s, there was the economy, the US was out of the war with Vietnam. It was bankrupt. The economy was very, very shaky. And what we saw happen in 2008 would have happened back then if they did not have this massive prison building and all the spin-off kind of attendant kind of businesses that go with it, like telephone companies just for prisons, and that costs maybe a 15-minute call costs $20, just that have nothing like what everybody else pays, what white people pay or anything else like that for phones. And that, this was key. And one of the things that happened was, under Reagan, he closed factories down and sent them to colonized countries outside of US borders. And so there were a lot of white people in rural America, in small towns and farms, were not doing well, who didn't have jobs, who no longer had jobs. So all of many, I don't know how many scores, if not hundreds, of small rural towns petitioned to get a prison in their town that would give white people who just graduated from high school, they didn't have to have an advanced degree, could make $75,000, $85,000, $95,000 being a guard at a prison. And this became the economy. And you saw all these towns that used to be totally impoverished of white working people. Now they have a new Walmart, a new Target, a whole bunch of new grocery stores, new housing, all of these things. And their town even gets, Starbucks and malls, and, it just grows as the economy grows for this whole cash cow, this gold rush that was opened up to white people due to the prisons. And it is also is part of gentrification, because in the 1970s already, major urban areas were already preparing for the gentrification that we see today. For example, here in St. Louis, in 1975, they had something called the Team 4 Plan. And the Team 4 Plan was to consciously put no investment in the African community of St. Louis, to allow neglect, they'd say, and to just let it rot, let it go, not put any money into it. And then, of course, they're going to develop it, quote unquote, and bring white people in. And they did the same thing in Oakland. It was called the Kaiser Plan, where they said that in order to bring investment to Oakland, they had to overturn the reputation of Oakland that was built during the 1960s at the height of the Black Panther Party. And, they had to, quote, settle down, quiet down the African community, that it had a bad reputation for resistance. They had to get rid of that. And as the chairman pointed out, what did they do? They assassinated Huey Newton, for one thing. And that was part of that plan. And now you see this incredible overrunning of just amazing gentrification all over Oakland, which has lost 44,000 African people in the last 10 years alone, pushed out to who knows where, based on this gentrification of white people coming into Oakland and upscale, just like St. Pete that we see there. And so the prison economy is based on counterinsurgency, on a criminalized African community, and it worked as a tremendous economic development for white people on every single level. So many ways that the prison industry and economy was built. As I said, rural towns advertise for prison. I was looking at this article the other day that was saying that, can't open up right now, but how many, corporations, like these corporations of 6 companies for sure, that have made billions of dollars off of prisons. And one of them is Global Tellink, which is the phone company that goes to most prisons, that charges at least $17 to $20 for a 15-minute phone call. And how many billions and billions of dollars that they make and have make. There's Horizon, which is a $1.4 billion a year healthcare program, quote unquote. We all know that people in prison do not get healthcare, but it's like a health insurance that they have on prisoners. Also, the entire bail bond industry, billions of dollars. The law enforcement, the quote unquote, the way the sheriffs have asset forfeiture, which is basically stealing the houses and the cars, not only of say an African person who gets arrested, but their grandmother, their parents. They take everything that they can. And then, of course, the private prisons, including the GEO Group and the Corrections Corporations of America, that have just made billions and billions of dollars at the expense of the suffering of African people. And how in the state of Florida, this GEO Group had signed a deal with the state, a contract with the state that would guarantee that their private prison beds have to be filled. So therefore, Africans have to be arrested constantly. And so, you can compare the war on African people. I remember being in Oakland when there were helicopters flying over the Uhuru House over East Oakland all day long. It never stopped. There were SWAT teams breaking down people's doors. They had dogs. They sicked the dogs on people. They did everything possible to terrorize the African community. But you look at how now there's this whole vast addiction of white people to opioids, and we're supposed to have sympathy for them and understand that this is an illness, that people are addicted. It's not criminalized. Marijuana is basically non-criminalized for it's legitimate for white people to use it. It's still, Africans still go to prison for it. And, George Zoli, who's the CEO of the GEO Group, makes $6 million at least in salary. He owes reparations. Again, we are not targeting him as the end of this. It's just the beginning. But he's one of the people who is making billions of dollars at the expense of African people. And he must pay reparations. And that's what we're going to be fighting for as a way to open up this whole reality about prisons And that those resources, the resources, the reparations that George Zoley and the private prisons have to pay, have to go to the Black Power blueprint, which puts political and economic power into the hands of the African working class, and just are building economic development through the return of the stolen resources. So I want to just really salute this program tonight and this discussion, and say that these colonial prisons must go. They must be shut down. African people must have control over the prisons, and the whole law and everything else must have political power in their own hands to determine that the people who have to be in prisons are the white ruling class, white people who are complicit with the counterinsurgency and the colonial violence inflicted upon African people every single day, and that all white people owe reparations. And this is in our interest to pay reparations to the Black Power blueprint, which is creating a new world in which all human beings can live, no one at the expense of anyone else. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Chairwoman Penny Hess. Really want to salute you for that incredible overview of colonial prisons and exactly how profoundly they owe reparations. I think this is a question that in the year 2020, we're still getting our heads around. The depth, as you said, of the exploitation, the colonization of African people, the genocide of African people that's happening right here in the United States. So we really salute Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People's Solidarity Committee for doing all that research and giving us so many hard facts to digest and put through the lens of African internationalism and internalize the extent to which we do owe reparations as white people to the African community. And that brings me now to our next esteemed guest, Director Akilé Anai of the African People's Socialist Party. You are Director of Agitation and Propaganda. So we are really thrilled to have you here tonight. And this question of colonial prisons, the mass incarceration of African people, is one that, from my perspective, goes straight back to slavery. And so we want to begin by asking you about the party's stance on this. So could you tell us a bit about the African People's Socialist Party's position on the prison question as it is expressed in the party's 14-point platform?
Uhuru. Well, first, before I answer that question, I just really want to appreciate being a part of this discussion. I really want to appreciate the presentation given by Chairwoman Penny Hess. And because I know that, she said they're numbers, and this is a reality, but numbers are really important as well, I think, to be able to just really see how deep this thing goes. That we're not just having this conversation because we just believe prisons are bad. That there are hard facts. This is a matter of historical record. What we say. So, and what that just informs our position, our fight, and everything it is that we do is this information that's in front of us. And I also want to just salute my leadership, Chairman Amalia Shatella and Deputy Chair Anai Shatella, and also really want to salute this program in regards to and the campaign to call for reparations from for the mass incarceration of African people and directly at the prison industry. I think it's incredibly bold and as Chairman says we have to have audacity, and I also think that you don't really hear this happening anywhere else in terms of the struggles that people have with prisons. And lots of people can have struggles with prisons for many different reasons, but I think this makes it really concrete, and it talks about colonialism, and that African people are colonized, and the prison industry just serves as, efforts of colonialism. This is, colonial domination that African people, indigenous people on this land experience with the U.S. prison industry. And I feel like reparations really contextualizes that and makes the call very, very clear. What is it that we're calling on? What is it that we're fighting against? And so it's it doesn't become one of those just struggles, one of the other symptoms or the struggles that we just aimlessly fight against, and we can go on the treadmill of never-ending struggle against the prison system. But calling for reparations is a concrete demand that will be achieved, whether voluntarily or however. So anyway, I just really want to appreciate this campaign. And as you said, it's mentioned in the 14-point platform of the African People's Socialist Party, the position around these colonial prisons. And I want to just make the note that the 14-point platform is in every edition of the Burning Spear newspaper, and it was adopted in September 23rd, 1979, and then revised and adopted at the party's first Congress in 1981. And I thought that was really important to say, because this has been the party's position. This is not just something new that we're coming up with, but this has been the party's stance for, I don't math right now, but you can obviously know that's a very long time. Up to now, 2020, this is the party's position on prisons. And there are specifically 2 points that speak to prisons, and one of them is we want the immediate and unconditional release of all Black people who are presently locked down in U.S. prisons. And when we talk about questions people have about our 14-point platform, that's one of the biggest ones that they have questions about. Everybody get released from prison? And we are very clear, yes, all Black people must be released, all Africans must be released from prison within the U.S. And we call prisons concentration camps. Right. And that you said just a moment ago that the whole prison industry, the whole thing emerged based on this relationship of colonialism, parasitic capitalism, the war waged on African people, for the theft of our lives, our labor, our resources. That's the birth of the prisons, and that no such entities like this, functioning like this, existed prior to Africans being colonized by white people, by Europeans. And at no point, so at one point in time, the law and all the courts, however they dealt with the law and carried out the law, at one point in time when it was just outright slavery, when there was just enslavement of African people just bold in your face, at that point in time you could see that the courts, the jails, none of that is legitimate at that particular time. And at no point in time did it become a legitimate entity. And when we approve of some Africans being in prison and some Africans being released, then we make the mistake of legitimizing the colonial state. We make a mistake of legitimizing the prison system. And the fact of the matter is, it can't be good for some and bad for others. The whole thing is foul. The whole thing has to go, and the Africans are in the prisons as a consequence of colonialism. Regardless of whatever it is they say that they did or didn't do or whatever, the consequence of them being in prison happened as a result of them being colonized. And so there's no point in time under colonial domination did the prison system just become legitimate. It's illegitimate through and through, and we cannot make the mistake of legitimizing it. So we say free all African people from the colonial prisons within the U.S., and that African people through revolution will build our own, African worker socialist state power and be able to determine at that point the fate of those who would be in prisons, which would be the white ruling class, the neo-colonialists, the ones who sold out African people. Those would be the ones who'd be locked up. Those would be the ones who judged by the people, by the African worker socialist state. So that's what we're saying, but we can't lend any type of legitimacy, credibility to the colonial prison system, the court system, any of that stuff, because it serves to protect the system. It serves to colonize and continue the domination of African people in the U.S. and all around the world. And so that's a really really important point. And again, people scratch, what? But this is why we say that. So that's just one of the points, which is point 6 on the party's 14-point platform, in terms of our position on the prison system, and that we are calling for the immediate release of all Africans locked up in prison today, and reparations for Africans who had to, for locking up, for mass incarceration of African people, and for the Africans who are locked up today. So
Thank you for that, Director Akilé.
Yeah, I just want to express my total unity with that, and that the Uhuru Solidarity Movement that we fully unite with the party's platform and with the party's call for the unconditional release of all African people from these U.S. colonial prisons. So I just really appreciate your summation of that, and I also want to salute Chairwoman Penny's presentation. And I'm so excited about this discussion that we're having, because it's taking it, like you said, out of a single issue type of discussion and putting it in the context of the anti-colonial struggle and the solution,
right,
which is African self-determination
right,
and reparations.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the type of discussion that we as the Uhuru Solidarity Movement are going to bring to white communities throughout this country
yes,
through this campaign.
Yes.
So I just really appreciate everything that you've said so far, and I will now ask the next question in this interview. So, so Chairwoman Penny talked about China, and I thought that was very interesting, because you always hear about China in the U.S. media. It's this repressive, quote-unquote, communist regime, and you will be thrown in prison if you post something on the internet that's bad about the government and stuff like that. But not only is that completely untrue, and there's percentage-wise and just sheer numbers, way less people in prison in China than in the U.S., but also there are way less political prisoners. The United States has more political prisoners than any country in the world, and the vast majority of them are African political prisoners. And even the definition of political prisoner is something that the African People's Socialist Party has really has expanded, as you said. So I'm wondering if you could speak about the party's stance on the question of African political prisoners and prisoners of war.
So that's another point on the 14-point platform. It's action number 7. And it goes, we want complete amnesty for all African political prisoners and prisoners of war from U.S. prisons, or their immediate release to any friendly country which will accept them and give them political asylum. So, another example of the party just making it really clear about what it is that we're calling for. And, like the African People's Socialist Party has been in constant struggle to free political prisoners. It's always called for the immediate release of political prisoners. And, in many of the famous cases of political prisoners, a lot of that you would even see the party stamp, on those campaigns to release African political prisoners, who are in prison as a consequence of fighting to overturn the social system that bleeds African people every single day. And that's another thing that makes it totally illegitimate, because they get to white power determines what the laws are, what it is you can and cannot do. And according to the law, Africans can't be self-determining. Africans can't fight for self-determination, because if you do, you're a black identity extremist, and you're a terrorist or domestic terrorist and all these other things. And so the party has really raised up, and just what has been said about there are still African political prisoners of war in the prisons today. And I think what was it, just last week that they released the last member of the Move 9. I mean, and this is a struggle that's dated back to late 70s, 80s. I mean, this is what we're dealing with now. I mean, their whole lives have been taken away from them. Now they've been released up to this point for so long, and just the kind of torture they've had to endure. We've had a really profound relationship with a comrade who had actually passed as a political prisoner, Mfundi Lake. And he actually spoke at the party's first World Tribunal on reparations. And his testimony is actually transcribed in the book Reparations Now. And he talks about the prisons, and it's just it's a case for reparations, why reparations are owed to African people, and he talks about his experience in the prisons, because they function as these, as in Africans in general, but African political prisoners is torture chambers, where if an African is ever released, an African political prisoner is ever released, they'll make sure you never want to participate in revolutionary activity ever again. So yeah, the party has through just a struggle for total liberation, but just especially really high profile cases of African political prisoners have fought to release African political prisoners. That's in our platform, that's what we believe, and we call for the immediate release, and we call for hands off Assata and all these other things, to protect our African brothers and sisters who have been engaged in a serious struggle to overthrow the system. So.
Uhuru, incredibly important topic. Really appreciate that overview. Director Akilé, you're quite a force in the party, and it's really just an honor to be able to learn from you. You are, if people aren't aware, this is Director Akilé Anai, who is head of the African People's Socialist Party's Agitation and Propaganda Department, which means you're also the editor-in-chief of the amazing organ of the African People's Socialist Party, the African Revolution, the Burning Spear newspaper, which has been a non-stop publication in one form or another, if I'm not mistaken, since 1968. So that's over 50 years, around 52 years.
Yeah.
50, yeah. So as editor-in-chief of the Burning Spear newspaper, which has many subscribers who are Africans imprisoned within the U.S. colonial hells, right? These concentration camps. So could you talk to us about some of the letters that you're receiving from these locked up comrades, Africans imprisoned, and why these letters are so significant?
So I would say more than half of our subscribers are actually from Africans in prison.
Wow.
And we ship the spear to Africans in prison for free. And you know, we receive a flood of letters every month. We receive a flood of letters for people who who love the spear, who've been reading it for years, and from people who have just gotten the spear in their hands and they want a subscription because they love what they're reading in it. And you know, that's part of the significance of the spear, because we want to bring African internationalism into every corner of the earth. You know, everywhere it is that we are, where African people are, African internationalism has to reach them. And you know, we've seen letters where they said, you know, we've passed around the spear until it's fallen apart. This is the spear that we had, and you know, it's gone. And I've seen actually numbers grow from certain prisons. Numbers, you know, of subscribers will grow because that, you can tell the newspaper has now been circulating in this particular prison. And you know, we are involved in a process where we're trying to build the African People's Socialist Party, you know, on every front, everywhere it is that we are. We want to build the African Socialist Party inside the prisons, and behind the walls. We want to build the African People's Socialist Party. And so, because you know, one thing that's really important to understand is that Africans, and when you heard the statistics from Penny, you learn that you have this huge population of African people who are in prison and have been taken out of the ability to participate in revolution. And if you just say that, okay, well, we just abandon that sector of the African population, or Africans in prison, which is increasingly growing, you got millions of Africans who are not participating in the revolution, not participating in the revolutionary struggle on this front. We can't leave that abandoned, and you can't allow for white power to take these people out of the struggle. I mean, that's, you know, millions of African people that can be engaged in this process. And you know, it's another form of counterinsurgency, of course. And you know, so it's really important that we're able to get the spear into the prisons, to be able to organize the African People's Socialist Party, or you know, in different fronts into the prisons. And you know, our brothers and sisters behind those walls, I mean, they love it. They live for it. They write letters, you know, saying just how much they appreciate it, how much it keeps them going. I mean, you know, some of it just brings you to tears, you know, just really moving, and it just makes our work so much more important in terms of, you know, supporting this newspaper and getting it out everywhere. But it just says how potent the information in this newspaper is as well. But yeah, I mean, we are organizers everywhere it is that we are, and if there's an African internationalist in the prisons, and we, you know, are unstoppable. I mean, those brothers and sisters behind those walls are unstoppable with African internationalism. And we're seeing more and more evidence of that every day. I mean, people say, I want to join the African Socialist Party, and that's great. You know, we more of that.
Uhuru, great. Arming them ideologically to resist their conditions is brilliant.
Uhuru, thank you, Director Akilé. And just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge representatives of Unión del Barrio who are tuning in on Facebook. Uhuru to Unión del Barrio, who write, Uhuru comrades, salute to the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, end to the settler colonial laws, courts, and prison system. Uhuru. And victory to the Mexican people, and this land is the land of the indigenous people and must go back in the hands of the indigenous people. Yes,
Uhuru.
indeed, Uhuru.
Uhuru. So just want to appreciate that and just salute the barrio and appreciate that you're participating in this web show tonight. So Director Akilé,
Yes.
to continue with this excellent interview, wanted to ask you about running for office, something that you're quite familiar with. You have run for office in St. Petersburg in 2017 and in 2019,
Yes.
and you have gone viral. As many people watching may remember, your campaign in 2019 enjoyed such vast and widespread international support that your campaign finance documents actually crashed the city of St. Pete's server because they were unprepared to process so many donations from so many people from so many places. You even had to turn down donations from Africa and the Bahamas and other places because your campaign right here in Little St. Petersburg, Florida went internationally viral. So you were the first candidate as a candidate of the African People's Socialist Party to raise the question of reparations to African people in the context of municipal politics, local government, electoral politics. And since then, literally within months of your last campaign, we've started to see spreading like wildfire different city council members talking about reparations, whether it's in Evanston, Illinois, whether it's in San Francisco, where they're forming a reparations task force, that the idea of making reparations something that's prioritized in a city's local budget is becoming more and more normal to talk about, and that is obviously attributed to the tremendous influence of the African People's Socialist Party and your campaign. So where's the question in that? The question is, based on the work that you've done, that you are doing in the party and in the whole electoral arena, how do you see this whole question of reparations? What does reparations for mass incarceration look like in the view of the African People's Socialist Party?
Well, I think what we've talked about in the whole discussion of reparations is that, reparations, everything that the U.S. sits on, everything that the white world sits on, are the stolen resources of African and other colonized peoples of the planet. And, reparations looks like the overturning or the overthrow of, that power, white power, all over the world, and the return of all of the stolen resources. And part of stolen resources is the human resource. And I mentioned how you have millions of Africans who've been taken out of the process of revolution, participating in revolution. But when you take millions of Africans and lock them into these prisons, and then all of their labor, and everything that they've got goes to producing for the prison industry, goes to serving the prison system. You've removed that African from the ability to participate in and contribute to the society, and which under colonial domination is already a contradiction, because Africans under colonialism in prison are not everything we do. All of our labor, is extracted and taken to benefit these major corporations, these CEOs, these billionaires, and none of the real value of that labor goes back to the African community. But it removes the productive forces from society and from African communities.
Right.
And so we not only lose the human resource of that one person, but we lose everything that person was going to contribute, everything that person was contributing at that point that they were arrested and thrown into prison. We've lost all of that value from our community.
Right.
And we hear numbers, and we've also even heard amounts thrown out about what the estimated amount of what is owed to African people. But you can't really quantify that. You cannot, because we know some of the, people say, okay, well, slavery, all kinds of, we can account for some of that. And then most times I hear a number for slave labor alone, and that's where the number stops.
Yeah.
But it does not talk about all of the other things that African people lose as a consequence of all of these contradictions, including Africans being thrown into prison. And so, that's what reparations means. Reparations for now just the resource that you have stolen from the African community by throwing this African into prison. There's, Chairman said that, when you talk to any African anywhere in this country, they've either been to prison, they know somebody who's been to prison, or they know somebody who's in prison at the moment. I, like, my own personal story, like, I have an uncle who's in prison right now. He got a 26-year sentence for a drug charge. And, he has 3 children who they were all kids when he was snatched away. And our family, we lived as a collective. So we have my uncles, we all lived in the same household. And everybody contributed to the household, allowed us to have, comfortable living. And when they snatched him away, it totally disrupted everything in that household. Everybody had to move away and go into their own places because we could no longer sustain that. That was just one person they took, and it totally disrupted everything. And then those children had to grow up without their father. We're talking about babies, big newborn baby who has no real relationship with his father outside of, what he can see behind a glass. And that is what you have taken from the African community. You've taken a father away from the African community. You've taken this resource from African people, and that's why reparations are owed, because you disrupted it, you've stolen it, and there's so much more, because it doesn't just affect the person who's in prison. It affects everybody who knows that person, who loves that person, with that person. I mean, we're going to be talking about seriously even how partners are affected by their spouse being thrown into prison. A lot of the times African women go to visit African men, are terrorized, and you have to pick, just all this strip search, all kinds of stuff that happens to African women. Intimidate, you don't want to go there because you don't want to have to go through the process of having to just see your loved ones. So many people are impacted, and so much is lost through the process of taking an African and throwing them into prison. It's not just, it doesn't just stop at throwing that African in prison. You have to account for everything that you've done now that you've done that. And and also reparations for the types of brutality, the torture that African people have to experience. When you go to prison, really no matter length of time you spend, when you leave prison, you change. You have changed because of how the whole thing operates. I mean, you don't ever leave the same, and for some people, they can't even ever come back. They cannot recover. Africans kill themselves to commit suicide based on having just been released back into the wild after coming out of prison. I mean, they can't get a job or anything like that because they have this stuff on their record, or they've just been totally mentally just messed up coming into this process and coming out. And it's a round the clock thing. It does not stop. Reparations for the Africans who were on death row, murdered, executed. Right. That's what reparations from the prison system. That's what that means. That's what reparations is for. It's for these crimes, these war crimes being committed on African people, and just all of the things that we lose out on as a consequence. Millions of African people locked up. What does that look like? Labor-wise. What does that look like? What does that look like in terms of, everything they should be contributing to the African community, to the African liberation struggle, and to African people when victory is won? That's, that, how do you calculate that?
For real. Yeah, I mean, I just totally unite. Thank you so much for saying that, and I just unite completely. This system has no redeeming qualities. It has to go. There's no reforming capitalism. There must be reparations to African people. This thing has to be wiped off the face of the earth, and the damage has to be repaired.
Yeah.
Uhuru, I really unite with that, Jesse, and I really appreciate your answers, Director Akilé. I think your science and also the human element that you manifest, that the party manifests through this analysis, that it is what happens to the individual, that it's the entire community, that the community loses out on a human being. And how do you quantify that? When you bring in your uncle locked up, taken away from your family and your community, all the levels of that, economic, personal, psychological, it's mind-boggling. And for us in the white community to realize that this hell is happening around us, and I know personally, people that I've watched, that I know, people in my family who, whether it's violence with guns, whether it's drugs, they're not in jail.
The same way every African knows someone who's unjustly imprisoned, every white person has someone in their family who should be in prison.
Yeah, we all know this.
And isn't, because they've done things that, or knows someone who should be but isn't, because white people get away with stuff that African people would be arrested for even being accused of doing. All the time. So
repeat offenders, and we all have a story, and it's to the point of irresponsibility. Some of these people really need to be confined, and they go on harming people, but their whiteness and other things protects them. And the only way that we can shake that up is getting to this material solution, as you've been hammering home, which is reparations. And it really deepens my understanding of why we say unity through reparations, because it unites all these contradictions into one solution, right? One open wound. It's so obvious once you rip away all of the veils that imperialism puts over itself. So I just really salute you, Director Akilé Anai of the African People's Socialist Party, and I wanted to give you an opportunity, if you'd like to make any other comments on anything that we've addressed regarding the colonial prisons, regarding police murder, the state, the whole relationship of white power to African people. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I just really, again, appreciate this discussion and think that, this campaign is going to be really, really important out in the world, because it gives people a concrete to what end in terms of what it is that we're fighting for and fighting against. And I wanted to say that, we're talking about the prison system, and that white people play a really big role just as people, individuals. White people play a really big role in, the fate of African people. And that, white people you don't need a badge, you don't need to be hired by the sheriff's department or the local police department in your area to be the state, to function as a state. Regular white people, as we know, carried out the lynchings here in this country. And carry out white vigilante murders of African people every single day, and totally wipe their hands clean. Probably don't even get talked about. It's a norm, and white people wield the power of the state over the lives of African people. When you in a situation like Lily White St. Pete, you're downtown, you see an African walking, white people just call the cops, and and who knows whatever happens to that African after that. And so we're talking about the historic role that white people have played in this process. And just in terms of looking at the prison system, looking at the role that white people play, the role that you play in the process of Africans being stripped from the African community and thrown into these concentration camps, these torture chambers, and that white people, through the work of the African People's Socialist Party, have the ability to play a different role in this process. That it doesn't have to, you don't no longer have to side with the ruling class state who exercises life or death over the African community. That you can stand between that, and that you have a responsibility to do that. That we people make fun of, they become memes, people like Permit Patty and all this kinds of stuff. That you've seen all the time. These are regular everyday white people who terrorize African people, and end up getting African people locked up, African children locked up, snatched away from their families. That's the role that average white people play. So that means average white people have to play a role in ending that. And that's through reparations to African people. And again, the African People's Socialist Party has made that possible, has made it possible for white people to take a different stance and rectify this historical wrong, and the current wrong, the present day wrong. So again, just really appreciate this discussion, and it certainly even deepened, for me, just this whole question of prisons and the prison system, and just how it's colonialism. We're talking about smash colonialism, and that's where this struggle lies. It has to be an anti-colonial struggle, Otherwise, again, we lean legitimacy to the state as it is, which is, it's a state that feeds off of, it came into existence off of and feeds off of the oppression, enslavement, and the colonization of African people and the majority of the people on the planet Earth. And that's what's, killing everything and everybody today. So we have a responsibility to fight to overturn that, which is why all of our struggles are tied to, a trajectory that is an anti-colonial struggle. It's an African revolutionary struggle. So, I just wanted to say that and wanted to really encourage people, because a part of this is building the anti-colonial economy of African people, building a liberated anti-colonial African economy where we can have freedom and self-determination, and that, we can feed, clothe, and house ourselves, that African people can begin to really seize power in our own hands through the process of, controlling our own economy. That way our futures are not determined by white power, but we have the ability to determine it for ourselves, which is what makes the Black Power Blueprint project so important, what we're doing out in St. Louis, because that is, everything that stands between the prison system from coming into the African community and, through the local police department, the sheriff's department, what have you, from raining terror on the African community, is our ability to seize power, to be able to, build things like Black community control of the police, to be able to protect our community, really lies in our ability to produce for ourselves, to work for ourselves, and that's what the Black Power Blueprint is doing. And so you got to see it as a part of the whole strategy. So, just donate, support the Black Power Blueprint as a stance to fight against the colonial prison system, and take the right forward stance in history and support the African Revolution by supporting the Black Power Blueprint.
Great. Bruce, salute. Director Akilé, Anai. Thank you so much for being on our program tonight. It was an incredible overview. Really appreciate it.
I unite. This has been incredible, and I think Chairwoman Penny is still on. I want to salute both of you. This has been very, very just illuminating and powerful and mobilizing. Like, I'm ready. I want to go to Boca Raton right now and have a demonstration in front of Zoli's house and GEO Group headquarters later tonight.
Yep.
I'm ready to go.
You got the gear for it.
Yeah, we're ready. We want to make this happen. And we want to go beyond protest. We want to be involved in a sustained, ongoing campaign under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party to bring the prison economy to its knees. This is not about one issue, one individual, and as Chairwoman Penny and Director Akilé have made absolutely crystal clear, this isn't even just about private prisons.
Right.
Because if it was just about private prisons, I might as well be Bernie Sanders sitting here next to you talking about how I'm going to abolish private prisons and that's why you should vote for me. Because that's on his platform. I might as well be Elizabeth Warren sitting here next to you telling you that I'm going to abolish private prisons, which by the way they're not, but they claim that that's part of their platform, as if that's the be-all end-all, as if prisons as a tool of colonial oppression of African people started with privatized prisons. There weren't private prisons when African people were put under convict leasing, and every single thing that they did was considered a criminal act, whether it was quote-unquote vagrancy, loitering, etc. They were put in prisons and then leased onto the exact same slave plantations from which they had just been allegedly emancipated. That wasn't private prisons. It's not about private prisons. It's not even just about prisons. It's about colonialism, as you said so eloquently. And that's why there's a direct relationship to supporting the Black Power Blueprint, supporting the creation of an African working class anti-colonial economy, because that's the polar opposite. That's like the chairman says, that negates the white power economy. And the prison system is the engine of the white power economy. When you look at the prison system, you're looking at the capitalist economy in naked and ugly right before you. It looks like African human beings forced into colonial cages, concentration camps, ripped away from their communities and their families in any form of legal, economic, productive life, and forced into slave labor that is actually in the U.S. Constitution. The 13th Amendment makes it legal for African people to be officially re-enslaved upon walking through that prison gate. So this is what we're talking about, and It's part of counterinsurgency, and I just so appreciate the analysis from Chairwoman Penny and from you, Director Akilé, that all white people are prison profiteers, not just the Zolies of the world. We're all little Zolies. We have all, maybe it's not $6.6 million that each of us has racked up from the prison economy and from the colonial economy, but each and every one of us has in some degree benefited from the colonial oppression of African people that rests upon things like mass incarceration and the whole colonial prison system. So George Zoley owes reparations, and I, Jesse Neville, owe reparations to African people, and all white people owe reparations to African people. And white people who are watching this show right now agree, because we have already received, towards our goal tonight, to raise resources to the Black Power Blueprint, a $40 donation from Janice Kant. We're trying to raise $200. I think we're gonna blow right past that. I feel confident. Casey Mackey put in $5. Uhuru. Chairwoman Penny Hess, one of our great guest speakers tonight, put in $40. Hey, Janice Kant and Penny Hess are two stellar members of the African People's Solidarity Committee that I would like to strive to emulate in my life. So they each put in 40. I'm gonna throw in 40 as well. So that's going to be some math on Comrade Carlozzi's part, but we'll get to that in a second. Susan Mortimer is tuning in, and she put in $25. Uhuru, and thank you, Susan. Jackson Hollingsworth, right here in our studio audience, is also tuning in and put in $5. Uhuru, Jackson. Diane Tournay, our comrade in Gainesville, Florida, is tuning in and put in $20. Uhuru.
All right, Diane. Uhuru.
That means we have raised $175, $25 left to go to meet our minute. $25 for Kyle Visa, our engineer. We just met our goal, but James, I'm going to turn it over to you to keep it going. And Chairwoman Penny, if there's anything you want to say, please chime in. But we want to keep raising these resources. This is life and death for the African community, and as quiet as it's kept for us too, as white people, this is our only future, is in solidarity with the African Revolution. So,
yes.
Uhuru,
because as the goal, Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny Hess.
Uhuru. Well, I really want to salute Director Akilé for such a powerful presentation, and I just think about how everything is going to be so different when African people have power and Indigenous people have power over their lives. And, even this whole question of prison and what is a prison? What it is in the United States is, part of colonialism. But what prison would be, the only people that would be in prison under liberated Africa is anybody who carried out imperialist violence, or who exploited the people, or maybe even neocolonialists, anybody who was against the people, not people who are in prison today because of the conditions of colonialism should not be there. And just so, like, after the Vietnamese won in 1976 against the U.S., I was able to hear, some of us were able to hear some of the Vietnamese speak when they came on tour to the United States, and they talked about how they had a lot of a huge sector of their population, large sector of their population, who were victims of the French had pumped heroin and opium into Vietnam for 100 years. And so they had a lot of addiction to that based on the colonial thing. Just like in the United States, the French put drugs into there and made billions of dollars from that. And also because all of the US troops and bases in Vietnam, the US bases, of course, created situations where Vietnamese women, had to be sexual workers or prostitutes. So they said that when they won power, they took all of the drug, people addicted to drugs and women who had been forced into prostitution and sent them out into the countryside to these places that had once been colonial nuns and all this stuff, like convents out there. And they had a job training. They had, they just taught them all the skills of the society. They said that women who had been so hardened by their forced life on the streets under imperialism, just transformed and even cried, or, just everything came out and they became part of the society in a really rapid way. And it was really a beautiful and humane vision of, how these colonial contradictions would be dealt with. And just one other example I wanted to say was a few years ago. Well, I would say it's probably about 15 years ago or so. And I might have been telling Jesse about this before, but there was this case in the Seminole Reservation in southern Florida where a Seminole man was, apparently he was intoxicated, and he parked his car right on the banks of a lake. And in the back of his car were two of his children who were in car seats asleep, two toddlers. And the car rolled into the lake and the children drowned. And so this was in the paper, the Seminole people had their own tribal court. And their sentence for this man was, what they said was, well, we know him. And the best sentence that he can have for our people is to not go to prison, because a lot of people depend on him, and for him to work, to stop drinking, all these things that they said, and to be part of his family and the community. That's what we want him to do. And the federal government stepped in and overturned that and sent him to prison. But just like, it's a whole different thing, when indigenous people have power, prison's not going to be, anything. There's not going to be prison. It's just going to be places where imperialists are put, and then other kinds of programs to deal with all the ravages of colonialism on every front in a really humane and beautiful way. And that is what reparations has to go to, and that's what the Black Power Blueprint represents. It represents this kind of power in the hands of the African community. And you should see the response it gets here in St. Louis. I mean, it's like exuberance, and Africans who were going to be pushed out are really determined to stay. And because this is here, because the outdoor event space, they think it's, it's so beautiful. And it's just, this is the vision. This is really happening, where African people of the party, the community is taking power, and it is transforming this, and it affects everything. So that's what reparations are part of, actually creating a new society. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People Solidarity Committee, thank you for that incredibly optimistic view. I fully unite. I think it's incredibly important that we envision African people having power over their own lives, that we envision indigenous people having control of this land once again, that we envision colonized people throughout the world having power over their own lives. Self-determination is the highest expression of democracy. That is what the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement was saying when I first encountered this movement, and it is just making good on that promise, demonstrating how important it is. And that's exactly why we're here tonight, to talk to you about the Black Power Blueprint, right? This is the blueprint for oppressed people, for African peoples reclaiming the power over their own lives, the ability to say who stays in the community and who needs to leave. So out there, if you have any inclination to support this, whatever level, we encourage you to go to blackpowerblueprint.org and donate generously to self-determination in the form of the Black Power Blueprint. And we just wanted to give a bit of an update on what's been happening with the Black Power Blueprint projects. The One Africa, One Nation Marketplace, outdoor event space, and Gary Brooks Community Garden in progress. So this is really amazing projects.
You gotta see it, it's incredible.
And this
you will see it in St. Louis. We'll tell you about that in just a second.
Yes, you will. If you're going to go to the Uhuru Solidarity Movement's convention, which we encourage you to do. So this is all happening right at 4031-35 West Florissant Avenue, which, if I'm not mistaken, is not far from where Mike Brown was brutally gunned down in August of 2014. And this is across the street from the Uhuru House in St. Louis. And the Black Power Blueprint Project purchased and demolished 2 city-owned condemned buildings, which they often just allow to languish in the community as eyesores and as a pretext for coming in and brutalizing the community. Then secured architectural and landscape plans to create a beautiful multi-purpose outdoor event space with native plants and trees, a mural depicting the historical kindness and generosity of the African community collectively taking care of themselves, and that will be commissioned. The One Africa, One Nation marketplace will foster community commerce, which is so critical to everything we've been talking about, and economic opportunities for the African working class. The Gary Brooks Community Garden is collaborating with other black growers to provide fresh vegetables and to hold gardening and cooking classes. I mean, this is just incredibly positive, and this is the kind of thing that white people think they're creating when they gentrify. But you just can't do that at the expense of somebody else's community.
With a neighborhood crime watch program built into your community garden.
Yeah, and all these codes and liens on people's houses, so you're pushing the local grandmother out of her home while you get your organic produce. No. So the other things that have been accomplished by the Black Power Blueprint, including demolished 2 condemned buildings on 4 lots, graded and seeded land. And please chime in if you want to add any details on this.
I just want to say, excuse me, I know this sounds a little simplistic, but it's just so awe-inspiring to me how the Uhuru movement, everything the Uhuru movement's doing is the polar opposite of everything bad that I hate about the social system. Like, I hate gentrification. Well, the Uhuru movement is ungentrifying the North Side, and not just pushing back gentrification, but actually resurrecting and creating the basis for an African economic, political, cultural renaissance right there in North St. Louis. I hate police violence against the black community, and the Uhuru movement is fighting to put an end to that and build black community control of the police. I hate the whole thing about community gardens with neighborhood crime watch programs linked into them, which we have here in St. Pete. If anyone's wondering what the hell I'm talking about, white people made a community garden in South St. Pete that required its members to basically become mini George Zimmermans on the streets of South St. Pete. And this is just the polar opposite of that. It really is dual power. It's creating the new world that we envision it, and as we're envisioning it, as the party is envisioning it, you can see it coming into reality, and it's amazing. So I just want to thank everybody who has contributed, and I want to thank Amanda Carlozzi, our financial whiz, as we say, our calculator person who has been sending us updates, and I want to shout out, we got Deputy Chair Onizane Yeshatella tuning in tonight, and we want to salute Deputy Chair.
Uhuru, Deputy Chair.
Deputy Chair, in addition to presiding over the whole project of the Black Power Blueprint, has herself literally put boots on the ground and blood, sweat, and tears in all extremes of climate change, whatever, abrupt climate change, whether it's extreme freezing cold, extreme sweltering heat, was there in the dust, in the sawdust, leading the process of building the Uhuru House, and has just been doing so much since then to keep guiding this process into fruition. So Deputy Chair is just an unmatched revolutionary leader. So really salute Deputy Chair, who says, Uhuru, I want to donate $25, Uhuru Deputy Chair, and salute this powerful topic on the prison system. I want to say thank you to Director Akilé and the Burning Spear newspaper for sending African men and women in prison this amazing newspaper for free for over 50 years.
Uhuru.
Let's give a round of applause.
Uhuru, Deputy Chair.
We have Tunisha Hopkins tuning in from Georgia, who put in $25. Uhuru, thank you so much for tuning in. And we have Comrade Virginia Wilson in the southern region, in Louisville, Kentucky. Uhuru. Uhuru, Virginia, $5. We're up to $255 raised tonight, so
Beautiful.
$45 left to go to get to a nice 300. If we'd like to do that, which I think we would like. So I know we have to close out in just a couple minutes, but I did want to make a quick plug, if I may,
Please.
for membership in the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Go to uhurusolidarity.org/join-USM and become a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. This is the reparations organization of white people in solidarity with Black liberation. If you're tuning into this program for the first time and you see me and Jamie and you're like, why the hell are these white guys on here talking about reparations and Black power? It's because we are under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. We did not come up with this.
No.
Chairman Amalia Shatella, the African People's Socialist Party, formed the Solidarity Movement over 40 years ago here in St. Petersburg, Florida. Chairwoman Penny Hess was there at that founding conference, and that was a conference to solve the question of what is the role of white people in changing the world. For so many centuries, we've been part of the problem. We have been the problem faced by oppressed peoples around the world. How do we overcome that and become part of the solution? And there's been so many botched attempts at that have been brought down by our own opportunism. And the chairman solved that question. He said white people have to be under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. They need to go into their own white communities. They need to and they need to raise reparations to African people. So that's who we are. That's what we do. And you can become a member. You can donate your birthday for reparations to African people. You can become an active organizer. You can become a recruiter. You can recruit other people to join. That's the first thing you can do. When you become a member, you can recruit other people to join. You can sell the Burning Spear newspaper. You can do so much as a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement to build the revolutionary culture of white reparations to African people in your town. And we will actually come to your town and hold an event, even in your living room if you'd like us to, if you're willing to organize it. So become a member today. Go to uhurusolidarity.org/join-USM and join the Uhuru Solidarity Movement today.
Uhuru, I really unite with that, Jesse. Just want to echo that. If you're out there, if you're a white person, maybe you're thinking this, hey, they can't mean me. We do mean you. We mean exactly you. In whatever situation you're in. We were just regular white people, right? Before we encountered this movement. We're not some kind of celebrities or scholars or experts. We have learned this.
White people.
Right. We took that leap, right, to come down to the Uhuru House and see if there was a place for us. And indeed, there was.
Yep.
I can't express how grateful we are that the African People's Socialist Party created the African People's Solidarity Committee and Uhuru Solidarity Movement so that there is a role for white people. We don't just have to be the onlookers. We have a stake in this, right? It affects us too. Yep. So it's beyond just the moral question of being the right thing to do. So clearly the right thing to do. Yep. It's the smart thing to do if we want to have a future, right? Exactly. If we want to be able to see a world where our children and generations beyond us, whether we have children or not, what are we going to pass on to this world? Is it going to be this destructive, parasitic system that does nothing but suck the blood of the peoples of the world? Or do we want to be on the side of the peoples of the world, fighting for humanity? And in doing so, we find our own humanity. We discover our humanity through this project, through raising reparations in action, right? Doing that as an act. So that's how you can find out more about this. Right. You can join at uhurusolidarity.org. You can contribute. You can continue to contribute generously to the Black Power Blueprint at blackpowerblueprint.org.
And somebody actually did that as you were speaking, Jamie. Amanda Carlozzi went ahead and donated $40.
Wow. This is cadre. That's a cadre stance. This is all right. Really impressive, comrades.
And we'll get the total in just a second because my math skills are insufficient. So
that's okay. We're a collective organization.
We raised $295, $5 away from our new goal of $300. So I want to call on somebody, and you can do it after we close out the show because we do have to close out. We're at time, and we want to respect the time of our special guests and all of you who have taken the time to tune in and join this amazing discussion about shutting down the colonial prison system and demanding reparations to African people. Uhuru Chairwoman Penny.
I see in the comments Benjamin Prado from Union de Barrio said that he is putting in $50. That is really powerful.
Wow.
Uhuru. Yes, victory to the Mexican people, to the indigenous people. This land belongs to the indigenous people. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thoroughly unite with that
Wow, this has been quite. I am very honored to have participated in this program. We have Director Akilé, we got Chairwoman Penny, we got Deputy Chair Anai tuning in, Benjamin Prado of the Unión del Barrio leadership. Like, this is profound. This is a great honor, and I feel so energized by this, so ready to go, and I know that so many other people who are watching do as well. So we do have to close out, but anything else that you would like to say, Director Akilé, before we adjourn?
Uhuru, I just really appreciate this web show. I really appreciate everybody who's participated and donated to the blackpowerblueprint.org. And, we've been saying it a lot, for the plenary and onward, Vanguard up. So,
Vanguard up.
Vanguard up. So just a quick housekeeping, some announcements, and please intervene if I'm missing anything, Jesse.
Go ahead.
So we want to remind everyone that if you want to participate in the Omali Taught Me study sessions, that's every Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you can reach that on Chairman Amalia Chatela's Facebook page, or you can go to the Burning Spear TV YouTube channel and check out Omali Taught Me studies every Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, this March, the African National Women's Organization is holding its, help me out here, Director.
It's convention. It's themed Sisters United for the Revolution, hosted in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Will be in Philly. So you go to ANWO Uhuru, that's ANWO Uhuru.org for more information in regards to registration, program. All that information is right there. And ANWO is led by Comrade President Yejide Odumila. So you guys definitely want to begin organizing and getting ready to go to that annual convention. It's going to be really, really dynamic.
Uhuru Solidarity, Comrade Yejide Odumila, and the African National Women's Organization. Again, that's March 27th through the 29th in Philadelphia, and you go to anwouhuru.org. We also wanted to let everyone know about the Black is Back Coalition, an incredibly significant coalition, in large part led by Chairman Amalia Chatela and the African People's Socialist Party and several other African organizations. That's happening April 10th through 12th in St. Louis. And you can find out more information on that by going to the blackisbackcoalition.org.
Yeah, I want to say that it's their fourth annual electoral campaign school.
Fantastic.
So that's really important, especially we talked about, municipal election. We're talking about elections in general, and the African Revolution isn't, intruding into the electoral arena, the bourgeois electoral arena. So that's the fourth annual electoral campaign school where we are training everyday, ordinary African people, workers, women, youth, to how to run for office on a platform of African self-determination. So that's April 10th through the 12th in St. Louis, Missouri. blackisbackcoalition.org.
Gotta
And
love
the
this
weekend
organization.
after that is the USM National Convention.
Yep.
Did we mention that already?
No, we haven't. Please
Okay.
do mention.
Yeah.
So a week after you have the amazing experience of going to the Black is Back conference, stick around in St. Louis for Reparations Uprising, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement National Convention, April 18th and 19th in St. Louis, Missouri, in the Uhuru House, in the headquarters of the Black Power Blueprint, featuring keynote speakers, Chairman Amalia Chatela himself, and Chairwoman Penny Hess, among others. So that is going to be a monumental event. And we're going to be talking, amongst other things, about this campaign, about this issue, and we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty details of how we are going to escalate the struggle to demand reparations from the colonial prison industry in 2020.
Fantastic. All right. Well, are there any more announcements?
Nope.
Okay. Well, with that, I really want to thank, first of all, our amazing guest, Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People's Solidarity Committee out in St. Louis. I want to thank the amazing Director Akilé Anai of the African People's Socialist Party for being here. Thank you.
I want to thank our great host, Jamie Simpson, if we can give him a round of applause.
Uhuru. I want to thank Chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and my esteemed co-host, Jesse Neville.
I want to thank our engineer, Kyle Weiss, right here.
Yes. Our amazing studio audience. Woo!
All right.
And all of you, everyone
Yes,
who
thank you.
tuned in tonight, who contributed, thank you so much. Together, this movement is changing the world. African people are winning. We are winning. We will win. So keep it up. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Uhuru!
Uhuru!
Unity through
Reparations!
Yes, I'm